All right, in honor of keeping respect of everyone's time who is here, it's 7 p.m. and our mayor is en route. So we will go ahead and get started. Ms. Huntington, can you please call the roll for council?
Yes. Ms. McCutcheon? Here. Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Donnelly? Here. Mr. Dale?
Let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Since our last meeting, we have the minutes. Would anyone on council like to speak to the minutes or make a motion to approve the minutes from our previous meeting?
A motion to approve.
Ms. McCutcheon made a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jake made a motion to second. Are their mics working? Okay, we'll wait.
Test.
Did you test, Jake?
No.
It's not good.
Oh, yeah, let's, wiring.
They're on. Got a light.
Yeah, the lights are all on. Let's test, Dave. Test, test,
I'll just talk really loud.
Me too.
test. Okay.
Can you pick it up? Okay.
This one is not working.
Here, you can get picked up.
He'll talk loud.
Okay. It's fine with us, but I know the people are watching on the YouTube channel can't pick up the sound, so we'll just speak into here. Okay, so let's take a step back. We were approving the minutes of the previous meeting.
A motion to approve.
And Jake had a second. All those, if there's no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the approval of the minutes was passed. The consent agenda, which was in your packet, which is basically the review of the bill payment for the city. You've all had time to review that. Any discussion?
Make a motion we approve as presented.
Okay, a motion by Chris. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, there's a cheerful second over here, if you can hear that from Ms. McCutcheon. If there's no further discussion, I'll see who is in favor of that. I'll say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes. Under old business, I see nothing, but continuing is new business under the public hearing, the budget revenue neutral rate. And Dan, I'll look to some guidance here, and it looks like we may have, is that our mayor coming in?
No.
Okay. Dan, I will look to some guidance here.
Ms. Stevens, first, we did have one person request to speak to the council tonight, not as part of a public hearing, but if you would agree, Monica Gee would like to give a quick update about the Tonganoxie Days Festival, which would occur prior to our next public meeting
Wonderful.
scheduled later this month.
Okay. Welcome to the podium.
Is this one working? I have one. Do you want me to bring it up when I'm done?
It's all right. At some point, they'll all start working, and it'll be very loud while I'll be in stereo.
Okay. September 17th, I just wanted to give everybody an update. It's pretty much like it was last year. We have 3 nice bands. Kid games are being ran by, Jenny, help me out, West Haven. And that was a huge success last year, and they're adding to inflatables and slides and bounce house. So we're excited that they take over that part, and they have the volunteers, so it's awesome that they do that for us. We added adult games to that, yard dice, what else is there? Jenga, Connect Four, that's all huge. So those will all be sitting in Pocket Park this year. Then we have 7 food vendors and 2 alcohol vendors for the evening. We have 60 completely full vendors, so that's really nice that we're all full. So we'll be extending down into the next block to accommodate those, but we did finally cut it off so we can plan and let everybody set up. But it'll go from starting at 7 a.m. to let vendors come in and set up. We have breakfast trucks, coffee trucks, starting when vendors set up, and they go until 10 o'clock at night. So we got a good group of activities for FFA will have their petting zoo, and they're expanding it this year, so that's nice. But is there anything else I'm missing? It's a good event,
It'll
so
be fun.
it'll be fun. Hopefully everybody can come out. Hopefully we have good weather, so. Any questions?
Well, thank you to your group for organizing Tonganoxie Days. It sounds like there's something for every age,
Everybody.
every level
Yeah.
of, interest, everything from the petting zoo. I can't resist a good petting zoo.
Right,
Uh,
that's fun.
And getting a lot of different community groups involved, and the fact that it's downtown, that'll bring a lot of people, hopefully from surrounding communities too.
We have a lot, and
So that's great.
we have a vendor coming from Nebraska. I don't know why they would, but they are. They heard how good it was,
for
and
them.
another vendor said it was great, so they're coming. So we're excited about that. Thank you,
Good
everybody.
evening, David. Thank you, Monica.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. I tried to fill your shoes while you were gone. I was a little nervous, but I think we made it through, except for some of the microphones are broken. Now that you're here, I'm sure that they will work.
You might take
Oh,
this
yeah, that one.
There we go. I appreciate you, and thank you for your patience, everyone. Where are we on the agenda?
Under new business, public hearing about the budget revenue neutral rate.
Okay, point of procedure on that is I open up the public hearing, we hear from the public, and then we close the public hearing, correct?
That is an option, Mayor. The other thing we could do is have staff, we have a fairly brief presentation to kind of talk about the process, what's been established, included in the budget, what still remains as a discussion item, and maybe queue it up that way. That way, if there's folks here that are interested and haven't had a chance to brush up on what we've been budgeting for the '23 budget, that should kind of bring everybody up to speed.
Okay, so
And then maybe at the conclusion of that, then open it up for a public hearing and comments.
I like your way, it sounds good. Let's go
Okay.
that way.
Great. So I'll do a quick introduction. So the presentation we have, again, just kind of reminds everyone, including staff and the elected body, as well as the public, of how involved developing the budget is. We do have some additional legal requirements to meet for the revenue neutral rate, as well as just holding the public hearing on the budget. So we'll kind of talk through that a little bit. Again, wanted to remind you of the things that we've heard from either staff level, department head requests. I think those are all at a fairly minimum level this year. Requests from the community to help fund certain events. We'll kind of breeze through those as quick as we can, the CMIP project list that's being funded, and try to get to the what's remaining. we were able to shift 2 mills or 2.6 mills from the debt fund because we had some debt that fell off, and put that in the general fund for our publication, which gives you the ability, there's about not quite $160,000 that are available, and there's some 4 or 5 ideas or concepts there that you can discuss tonight and finalize the budget that way. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Porter to kind of go through the calendar and the budget, and go from there. Mr. Porter.
Thank you, George.
One thing.
Yes.
Make sure that we explain what CMIP is,
Sure.
just so not everybody has had a chance to sit and listen to that for 4 months, so.
Months,
It would be
yes.
helpful so they know what that is.
Will
Thank
do.
you.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. So as George mentioned, tonight we're here for a couple reasons. Action items, there are 2 on the agenda. One is a resolution to levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral rate, which will require a roll call vote to be conducted. The second action item is consideration of adoption of the 2023 annual budget. Prior to both of those actions, though, we do ask that the public hearing opportunities be conducted. And those are both required by state law, different sets of state statutes, but we will hold both this evening as they were published and advertised. Next slide, please. So this is a quick overview of months of work. As Mr. Donnelly indicated, more than 4 months of work goes into building the annual budget each year. We begin with the spring retreat, talk about visioning and goals, move forward through the CMIP workshop, which as a definition, CMIP stands for Capital Maintenance and Improvement Program. That includes items that we think of as like construction projects or items of a large cost in nature. Usually they're one-time or specific to a specific piece of infrastructure, but sometimes it includes maintenance programs such as the maintenance the city invested in the city street conditions over the past 5 or 6 years at an accelerated rate, and some equipment repair and maintenance programs as well. Following that, we conducted several budget work sessions through the month of June and July. Halfway through July, we were required to give notice to the county clerk of the city's intent to consider adopting a budget exceeding the revenue neutral rate and the maximum rate that would be considered. Based on the budget development to that point, we did give that notice, and we did indicate a flat mill rate as the highest level the city would contemplate for the city general fund and city debt service fund. And for the library mill rate, we gave an indication that it would be 0.609 mils less than last year's mill levy rate for those 2 respective funds, the library operations and library benefits. Those notices were prepared for all taxpayers and distributed by our county clerk, and those included notices of the hearing scheduled this evening for the revenue neutral rate particularly. We held additional work sessions in August on the 1st and the 15th, and those culminate in the preparation of the materials for your consideration tonight. And like George mentioned, we do have some items to further discuss before making a final budget adoption decision. Our deadline or our backstop to complete the budget and certify it to the county clerk is the end of this month. So we do have one more regularly scheduled meeting, but otherwise would have to call a special meeting if we failed to come to an agreement on an adopted budget. Any questions about the schedule before we move forward? Okay, next slide, please. And next slide, please. So in overview, looking at the proposed budget and the foundations upon which it was developed, maintaining fund balance goals, at least 15% reserves in the city's general fund, at least 30% reserves in all of the city's major utility funds, which include water, sewer, and stormwater, are preserved in this proposed budget and promoted to be continued and maybe even strengthened at a future date. We also look to maintain adequate reserves in the city's public safety equipment funds, and particularly our utility capital funds, because those funds are utilized in the event of an emergency. You've probably seen in the news, Jackson, Mississippi has experienced a municipal water and sanitary sewer crisis event, and it's bad, and they needed reserves to be prepared for just such an event to help keep continuity of service or emergency service provision in some cases. Second priority or overview item is the structural alignment of revenues and expenses. As George mentioned, for maximum flexibility, the council has at their option tonight the shift of 2.6 mils from the city's debt service fund to the city's general fund. That, as George indicated, was available due to falling off or completion of payment on a certain amount of the city's debt burden that's paid by the property taxes and the debt service fund. And so now that it's been promoted and published as in the general fund, we have some options into how those funds can be utilized or what other steps could be taken. We also looked closely as we developed the budget at matching debt service payments and revenue proceeds with legal and sometimes logical manners. So funds collected for water service provision are reinvested in providing water, buying it or producing it from the city's wells. Stormwater funds collected on utility bills were assigned to stormwater development projects and engineering analysis. And that's important because those ratepayers and service fee payers do expect that the services they're paying for are up to the level that they expect when they sign up for service or when they are required to collect that service from the city. Finally, conservative assumptions are a third underpinning of our proposed budget. We all are familiar with the activity at the business park with Hill's Pet Nutrition. That's going to be a large utility customer of the city. We did undertake conservative revenue assumptions for 2023. Until we see actual production and experience the demands that's going to put on our infrastructure, we can't adequately predict that with 100% certainty. And so we didn't overstep what we believe are conservative assumptions. We also look at sales tax and other volatile revenue sources and project those in a conservative manner as well. We also are at this point not proposing any rate changes to utilities, water, sewer, stormwater, and sanitation. Sanitation's contract is due for a reconsideration in November of 2023. So there is a chance that the budget may have to be amended if we determine at that time that a rate change would be required, either by the city or by the service provider that contracts that service with the city. Any questions about these items before we go forward? Okay, next slide, please. So this slide indicates in a high-level view sort of the three main buckets or components of the overall budget proposed for the city across all funds. So this isn't specific to the general fund or the debt fund or the infrastructure tax fund. Instead, it's overarching. So investment in local infrastructure is obviously a hugely important and large priority that we see from citizen surveys, from condition assessment results that we conduct and provide information about, and from the feedback we receive from the elected officials. Continued in this 2023 year is the completion of the Church Street Bridge reconstruction project, a sixth year of greatly increased street maintenance funding, mostly provided by the opportunities of the infrastructure sales tax to add to state and local fees we collect for street maintenance. A sidewalk extension project that was a community request brought in during the budget cycle in the North Star subdivision. Water tower construction at the Tonganoxie Business Park that's actually underway already but will be continued next year. Wastewater treatment plant improvements, stormwater engineering analysis of several older parts of the city that do not currently have complete curb and gutter systems, and rehab of necessary equipment at the water park in terms of specific equipment, chemical feed equipment, and umbrellas that provide shade to patrons. We also built in resources for operations and promoting operations. This includes a proposed cost of living adjustment and a 5% merit opportunity for our full-time employees. No additional jobs are added, no additional full-time or part-time positions, but we did add one intermediary step position in the fire department's organizational structure to give them more flexibility. We did include equipment excuse me, that includes the police department servers, fire department extrication equipment, and equipment used to test hydrants. Police and fire departments had increased operational costs that were included in the proposed budget, and the city's 2003 skid steer equipment and purchasing additional milling equipment to accompany that larger piece of equipment was included in the proposed budget from utility funds. Community support and development is also a huge factor in the budget contents. The Leavenworth County Development Corporation requires funding support for participation in that organization, and that is included in the budget. Community event funding, such as for the Tonganoxie Days event that Ms. Gee just presented information about, is included. And this year we do have, excuse me, 5 other local organizations that have each requested a portion of funds from the city to support their activities or to repair certain assets that they own and maintain, and that is included, and that list is in the slide, so I won't go through it in detail. This is a high-level picture, but it's some of the most important initiatives that we included in this year's proposed budget. The next slide, please. The capital maintenance and improvement plan mentioned earlier. What's shown on this slide, and apologies for the very small font, is a breakout of the projects funded in 2023 from the capital side. This includes investments in street improvements, bridge improvements, water improvements, sewer improvements, and stormwater improvements. And that's categorized in that. We're working this year on a better and enhanced document for the capital maintenance and improvement plan. It will accompany the budget book on the city's website and be a resource that people can reference to see what projects are planned or what projects are possibly currently underway when they maybe see construction or see notice of a contract award and want to learn more information. So we're hoping that that's going to be a good transparency enhancement for the city in our work on capital projects. Next slide, please.
Dan, just one real quick point on the 23 CMIP. I know later tonight we have an item for Timberlake subdivision, and just in case there's any neighbors from the existing subdivision there. It didn't make it on the summary slide before this, but I did want to point out that the booster station construction and purchase of for the Smiley Road project is listed, and it has a cost of $235,000 associated with it. So just in case anyone was here looking for that specific line item, it is on the list.
Thank you, George. Okay, this slide illustrates in the city's general fund, which is the most malleable and flexible source of funds and expenditures from the city. It breaks out on the pie charts to the right-hand side of the slide the 2023 revenue assumptions, and that includes 45% of the fund being funded by property tax and motor vehicle tax, 19% of the fund being funded through the city's 1% general sales tax, and then the remainder of funds being provided by grants, franchise fees, interfund transfers, court fines, water park charges, and what we kind of lump together as licensing and development fees for business activity. On the expense side, you can see a breakout as well by service in the lower pie chart. And that indicates the police department stands at about 40% of the overall general fund budget. The fire department stands at 26%. Just City Hall or general administrative services are at 13%. Public Works, which is partly funded through utility funds, only makes up about 8% of the general fund budget. And some of the smaller departments then include court operations, the water park codes, planning, animal control, and what we term legislative services, which is the smallest budget item. What's listed on the left-hand side of that screen, again, I apologize for the small font, is the list of department suggestions and public requests for funds from other community groups and organizations. As you'll see in the detail about included in proposed budget or not, all items are included in the proposed budget. And so those are assumptions made based on the feedback in prior budget work sessions. It's also listed if funding is split between the general fund and the utility fund or another fund, and whether it's a one-time or ongoing cost implication for each of those items. Next slide, please. The debt service fund, which is the other one we'll discuss in a few upcoming slides. You can see highlighted the brown bar in 2023 is the city's projected debt service obligations, which is just a little bit over 800,000. That's down from about, I believe, 870 or 865,000 this year. As you can see, that does stair step down, and that would continue to do that in the event that the city doesn't issue any other debt obligations owed from this fund. We talked earlier in the budget work sessions and the CMIP about the debt limit. The city currently is at about 34% of the debt capacity granted by state law. So we still have 66% of remaining capacity, and you can see the calculations listed below at how that figure is arrived at. Any questions about the debt obligations? Okay, next slide, please, Lindsay. Thank you. The major utility funds, I won't go through each of them in detail, but listed on this slide are the revenue and expenditure assumptions, and to the right-hand side of the slide, major utility budget requests funded by the water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater funds. You can see listed in that budget request section 2 items that Public Works brought forward, a 2002 loader and 2 2007 dump trucks. Those are not being proposed for inclusion in the budget, and thus they're not funded, and they're listed that way. They're brought there, though, because we do anticipate in the next several years we'll need to look at replacing that equipment sometime in the near future as it continues to age. If you compare our utility funds to the prior year, you'll also notice an increase in the water and sewer budget. That's largely driven by continued growth that we've seen in recent years, in addition to the largest, projected largest utility customer being added mid-year next year with Hill's Pet Nutrition as well. Next slide, please. Our public safety capital funds for the fire equipment fund and police equipment fund, the budget requests for this year are shown in this slide. One thing that is not shown, because it was shown on the last slide, is the water hydrant testing equipment that's proposed for purchase. Because that improves the condition and assesses the condition of the water mains in the city, the water equipment fund is able to pay for that equipment. And so the fire department, while they help utilize it, is not the funding source for that. There are 1 approved item, though, for the fire equipment fund and 2 for the police equipment fund, shown on this slide. And next slide, please. Thank you. So the slide listed here shows a 4-year history, including the 2023 proposed budget, and the second column from the left that illustrates, broken out by the 4 funds collected by the city, 2 of which are remitted on to the Tonganoxie Public Library. But that shows a mill levy history for the past 3 actual years and next year's projected year. This includes the assumptions in the published notice for the budget. So again, that was a flat mill levy for the city funds and a 0.609 decrease combined between the 2 library funds. What's also illustrated in the pie graph on this slide is the fact that of these funds, when you break them out by relative comparison, about 2/3 of the city's property tax revenue goes into the city's general fund, 17% to the debt fund, and then the library funds comprise about 16% of the overall collections for property tax for the city services. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Everyone's favorite slide, the breakout of your tax dollar for property taxes paid by a city resident or business owner. This uses 2022 projections because we don't yet have final approved budget information for any actually of the overlapping taxing entities. But looking at 2022, the city is the second highest recipient of a tax dollar paid by a local resident or business owner. The school district collects about 42 cents of every dollar paid. The city general and debt service funds account for about 25 cents of every dollar. The county is just a hair less at 24 cents of every dollar. The library makes up about 5 cents, the rec commission about 3, and the state of Kansas is at 1 cent of every dollar. This just illustrates, when we talk about property tax tonight and budget, we're focusing on that second segment and the library segment in terms of what's being considered by the city council. We don't have any influence or impact or ability to impact the other four taxing entities shown on this slide. Next slide, please. And so getting to probably the most, the slide with the most information for your consideration tonight. With the city's 2.6 mil shift from the debt service fund to the general fund, the city council now has the opportunity to make a policy decision about how to utilize about the equivalent of 2.567 mils of revenue in that general fund source. That equates to about $158,800, rounded just slightly. And there are 4 bullet points listed on this slide as proposed considerations for the city council to make. The first is the city manager's recommendation for a 3% cost of living or COLA adjustment for city full-time classified employees in the pay system. This impact on a one-year basis was estimated at about $71,000 for next year, and that equates to about 1.148 of that 2.567 mils of equivalent revenue for consideration of use. That is paired with another concept that would be the early repayment of some of the city's debt obligations. If you'll remember from earlier work sessions, the city currently maintains a little over $10 million of long-term and in some cases a little shorter-term debt obligations. That's a mix of GO bonds and lease purchase agreements. And the city would be eligible to make early repayment on some of the lease purchase obligations. And the amount shown in this slide is $87,800, or the remaining 1.419 mils, should the first bullet point be incorporated into the adopted budget. Other considerations, though, listed in bullet points 3 and 4 are increasing funding or adding funding for other initiatives not listed and described in the proposed budget to this point. And then finally, reducing the general fund mill levy for the city by up to that amount of 2.567 mils is also an avenue that could be considered. Happy to take any questions you might have on this slide. I don't know, George, if you have any points you want to add.
No, I think I appreciate the summary, and our intent was maybe to go through that a little bit quicker, but since we do have a few folks here tonight, hopefully that provided some context for the months of work to get just to the point to have some discussion on this tonight. Again, just to reiterate what Mr. Porter said about what we think is still available in this budget, it's a hair under 160,000. We've looked at various scenarios. Over the months, we've talked about various options. As Mr. Porter mentioned, my recommendation is to use a portion of this to provide a cost of living adjustment to our employees. And although we do have a merit pool available up to a certain percentage, not every employee receives that amount. I mean, it's a performance-based merit pool. However, due to some of the economic factors out there today, we're looking to make some adjustment. Again, we're a small community. This would impact all employees except the city manager position, so 34 of our employees could benefit from that. Again, it has a value. There's a cost to providing that. That's a cost we'll continue to carry into future years because it is a roll over into salary or personnel costs. The other 3 items are items that we've talked about, providing property tax relief, early repayment on some debt. When we look at early repayment, most of our debt was issued at a different time in terms of what interest rates are. And so we're not carrying very exorbitant interest rates on a lot of our debt. And while it could be nice to get some relief there, I didn't feel in my recommendation to you for the budget that it was a prioritization item. And then as we had some additional discussions, there were either community groups that asked for a reduced amount or some other initiatives that were brought up. You know, if I had to quantify that, I'd say that's probably an ask for another $20,000 or $25,000. And we haven't allocated for that. One thing to keep in mind, the value of one mill in the city of Tonganoxie, it's right around 62,000. So, you know, you start thinking of if we're going to do something like a mill levy reduction, each mill we're reducing is removing 62,000 in available budget. So, and we'd be happy to go through any other scenarios that you might have questions about, but I think the rest of our presentation, Dan, is more related to the public notice and the budget documents we have to submit. So, Mayor, I don't know if this would be a good time, unless you folks have some additional questions, to open it up for the public hearing to see if we were maybe able to answer some questions, or if there's still some questions that are lingering. And then ultimately, you'll need to give us some direction on this remaining item, the 158,000, and how to allocate those funds.
Council, if you don't have any questions at this point,
Oh, you know I would have one.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we, and I've already talked to staff about it, and that's the ending balance budget and that net effect of where it is versus policy. That, you know, I think that's gonna be important to me. It will be important on my vote. And I know you have it, so.
Yep.
Did we discover a policy for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's in there, and he has it on page 3 or 4. And the statements of policy is at least, it doesn't say
Right.
exact, so I wanna make sure I get that out there.
Okay. At this point, then, I would open the public hearing for the 2023 budget revenue neutral rate. Are there any statements or questions?
Talking about my name is Kathy. I live in South Park. And I got this
I'm sorry.
notice of
ma'am,
estimated ad valorem,
Ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name. It's my fault.
Kathy.
Kathy, and what's your address?
230 Rawlings Drive.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
this subdivision taxing, is it already been taxed on us? Has it already been taxed to us for this year?
I don't know the answer to the question of that. Mr. Brakovich?
Just are you asking for explanation for that letter we all got?
Well, I had to
'Cause it
pay
is
extra
confusing.
taxes this year, so I'm asking, is that in there? Because it said we were supposed to be notified,
And that is your notification.
and we
Yeah,
just got it, yeah, so,
Dan, that's coming up next in your presentation. Do you want to talk about that letter? Because it is confusing. We're required to send it now, and it's new this year.
Yeah, that's right, okay. Sure, so the notice that you've brought, Kathy, thanks, is the revenue neutral rate notice. So this is the first year that that's been required to be issued by the county clerk. And so that information is the maximum mill levy, and thus the maximum tax bill that every taxpayer might owe should the budget be adopted with no reduction in revenue for property taxes.
so I haven't paid it.
No, it's a quote for next year's tax bill, should all the revenue assumptions by all the jurisdictions that levy taxes remain the same.
Okay, and when will that be voted on?
Well, tonight it could be for the city mills, the vote, and then the other jurisdictions all need to do it before October 1st.
Okay, my other question is, if we're already paying personal property, why are we gonna be charged for subdivision when I'm sure there's houses around that are not in subdivisions in the city? Am I still on?
So this is just a notice for the property taxes on your real property, so your land or land with buildings and improvements. So it's a notice about the next year projection of taxes that, like you said, you already pay. So this isn't in addition to that, it's more explanation about what you're already being taxed for, just next year's amounts.
And there is no additional tax for living in a subdivision.
Yeah.
It is
Why did they
within the
say
city, within the city, everybody has the same tax rate.
If you go back to the dollar.
It is, Kathy, I agree, it's so confusing. I still have the little dinky house where I used to live in Lawrence, and I got one from Douglas County, and it's just as confusing.
Well, I don't.
It makes no sense. I knew it was coming just from these meetings, but even when I got it, I was like, can somebody explain this to me? And I still don't. I mean, it's, the state is requiring it now for all small cities to send it out, and it's just kind of a confusing mess.
But we're already paying it.
Yeah, it's just saying that next year, this is what you could pay, and this legislation was intended to be helpful, but I just think it's confusing a lot of people.
Well, it is, because I already had paid extra this last year. I lost my husband last fall. So I've lost some income. And if I read this right, then there's gonna be another $800. Who can afford, the seniors, how can they afford to stay?
We're sorry for your loss. I apologize. What that letter is supposed to do is it's supposed to be more information for people, and it just has made it more information that is unnecessary information. Whether you're paying another $800 a month or not, I don't know. I'd have to look at your thing, but I am so sorry. I don't have a lot of answers for you.
One thing to keep in mind, and it's not ever explained well, is that your taxes are based on a mill levy set by all those entities that Dan showed, the county and the city and the library, and those are all mill levies. But it's based on the valuation that's set by the county and the county appraiser. So if you have a house that was worth $100,000 last year and the county appraiser says it's worth $120,000, your math tells you that you're going up. And I'm guessing that's what you're looking at in the differential.
Well,
And they don't ever tell you how it all works. It's really confusing. So what we've seen, and I can, probably everybody up here has seen the same thing. I know I have the same statement in my tax bill, and it went up 20-some-odd% from last year to this year. And that's not because of the mill levy, not because what we levy, and not because what the county levies, and not, it was because my valuation went up based on what the county appraiser said. He said my house was worth 100 last year, now it's worth 22 or 23% more than it was. And that's never explained very well how that all works.
I say, and it also tells you to, for more information, to contact the taxing subdivision, but they give you no number to call. Who am I supposed to call?
Look, you got the first one here with the city. You're
Right.
talking to the right people from the cities, that little wedge of the city dollar that you saw. And unfortunately, you have to go see the county for the county piece, and you have to go see the library, which is us. We'll take that one. Then those all make up. We don't control that at all. We have nothing to say about theirs. Even though we can go do the same thing you're doing, is go talk to them and say, hey, what about this?
Well, and even, I was in the county in Leavenworth, in the county courthouse, and I was at the county clerk's office. I had a question about, not this exactly, but somebody was in there with the same question, and they said, that's not even the county clerk's office. You have to go to the county appraiser's office. It's over and up these stairs and down the hall before you can get the, how do they evaluate your home's value answered. So you're not the only one with this question, and I'm so sorry about your loss.
So if I wanted to appeal this, because I think I'm supposed to pay in November, I have to go up to the appraisers in Leavenworth. Is that where I go?
Yeah, you have to make an appeal to the county. We don't control the valuation at all. You would have to go appeal to the county, and I believe it is the appraiser's office.
Okay,
That's upstairs on the west side.
okay.
Thank you.
That was an excellent question, though. Thank you. And I think that helped, I think that hopefully helped other folks as well.
I forgot to mention there was a 3-minute time limit on there, but that's okay. It worked out just fine. Is there anyone else who would care to speak?
Wally Bronner, 111 Willis. We moved into town 5 years ago against my better judgment, but anyway, the way here most of the time. But the appraised value on our house went up 20% this year, which is kind of in line with, I think, about everybody else. But the bottom line being that although the city's budget is only a small share of what I'm paying for $5,000 for a house in Tonganoxie on property taxes, but still, it functions out that about 12% increase is what we're talking about here across the board. For what are we spending in this city 12% more for next year? I mean, I saw this going down here. Most things are 2, 3, 4, 5%. So where are we getting a 12? Am I missing something here?
One of the things we're discussing tonight is whether to reduce the mill levy for the taxes for you folks. Beyond that, Mr. Porter may have more information.
I mean, I think we've all, well, your point is excellent, and I think we've all talked about this ad nauseum for months. My concern as a council member would be for looking at it from the city perspective is the same as anybody's at their personal home. If costs are going up, or we're unsure what costs are going to do, and our job is to provide services for the city, and then let's say the cost for salt and sand to put on the roads in the winter, it becomes astronomical. Oh, we don't know that. I would rather have a cushion to be able to provide that for the city than not. Now, it's not going to be $100,000 worth of salt, but there are a couple other things that are in mind to put that into the budget and not just have that. It's not a lot of surplus, but at this point in time, say we drop the mill, raising it in the future might be really difficult. But I just want to make sure that the city can provide for Willis Drive to be taken care of if there's something that happens there. But no, that's my hesitancy in lowering it, is because I want the city to be prepared for what might be to come that we might not be able to anticipate. That's my response to you, but I want to hear your response to me after that. I like talking to you.
Council, do you have anything else?
I always forget this, but I think it's pertinent. Can you remind me what 1 mil means to a tax bill on, say, whatever we do, $100,000, $150,000 home?
Sure, I'm gonna have to use a calculator
math.
though. So I kind of reiterate the whole process, and we print a few copies. We do a spring and fall newsletter. We print hard copies that we try to distribute in other places, but we also make them available online. The last 2 years, spring newsletters kind of talk about how it starts with the county appraiser, who is really a state Department of Revenue employee, and what rules they follow to determine value, whether it's on a house, a piece of vacant land, or a commercial property. And then there's an assessment rate that's applied to it. So they get an appraised value. single or residential property is assessed at 11.5%. Vacant property is assessed at 12%. Commercial property is assessed at 25%. Then the mill levies are applied to those assessed valuations, and that's how it's determined how much your property tax bill is. And as we've talked about, the mill levy is representative of not only the city portion, but the county, the school district. In our case, the school district also collects for the rec commission. The city also collects those two mills, two different types of mill rates for the library. And then, of course, the state is at that 1%. So to answer your question, Mr. Dale, a house that's appraised at $200,000 would be assessed at 11.5%. So the assessed value would be $23,000. So then the calculation you would do is a mill is based off of 1,000. So you divide 23,000 by 1,000, it's 23. So 1 mill reduction would be a $23 reduction in your property tax bill for the year.
I also note that, I think it's important to note that normally at every meeting, we have a list of our CMI projects that we have done and completed, like we've resurfaced all of the roads in town. I've looked at that list a million times and now I can't think of one thing on it. But there are lots of things that we use the money for that are for the betterment of the town and for living in town. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? I thank you all for speaking and for attending. I appreciate that. At this point, I will close the public hearing.
Mayor, may I interject something, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So included in our agenda tonight are two separate public hearings. So though they're both on the same general subject
Okay.
of the 2023 budget and the assumptions in the budget, I would ask that you open and conduct a separate public hearing for the consideration of the 2023 budget, which is our traditional public hearing we did before the revenue neutral rate public hearing was added.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I will open the public hearing for the consideration of the proposed 2023 budget as published. Is there anyone who would care to speak? I'm not seeing anyone who cares to speak for that public hearing. And assuming that conversation was not germane, I will close the public hearing for the consideration of the proposed 2023 budget as published. Which brings us back to item B, Resolution 09-2201, a resolution of the City of Tonganoxie, Kansas to levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral rate. Mr. Brakovich?
Yes, Mayor. So, again, I think the final item to finish out discussion of how we can finalize this budget is what to do with that $158,810. Sorry if I'm sorry, $158,800. I don't know if we want to kind of in general to answer though Mr. Donnelly's question about fund balance and our fund balance goals. So years ago, it was established that there would be a 15% fund balance for general fund and a 30% fund balance for utility funds. And again, that's kind of maybe put it in terms that other people might be more familiar with, reserves. And as Mr. Porter mentioned when we talked about initially, it's there to help if there's a disaster of some type, whether it's an economic disaster or a natural disaster, to be able to continue operations when for whatever reason maybe revenue's not becoming available. One of the things that we've heard over the years, and one of the main times that comes up, is when the city needs to go issue debt. And when you go to the bond market, there's a required bond rating that's done by typically one of two large agencies. And what they look at is your debt load and a bunch of other factors, but one of the biggest ones is how strong are you financially? And so one of the things that we've been trying to work on is to increase the general fund balance up from the 15% reserve and operate more at a 20% or greater level. For whatever reason, during COVID, sales tax numbers, not only for us locally, but at the county level, have risen drastically. And we have two different types of sales tax that come in. The sales tax you pay directly, and then compensating use tax. And so to simplify it, I think what happened during COVID is a lot of people ordered things online. And in Kansas, the way you pay sales tax is at the point of delivery. So when items are delivered, there's those vendors then remit those sales tax dollars to the state, and the state eventually returns it to us. So because sales tax numbers have been stronger than what we initially had conservatively projected for a small town like Tonganoxie, that's been able, and conservative practices in financing, city finances altogether, have been able, they've all contributed to us building fund balance above the set goals. And so one of the questions that Mr. Donnelly asked is, let's take a look at that to see where's the balance. You know, maybe 15% is too low. If we formally adjust our general fund balance up to 20%, what does that really leave in reserve? And I'm not sure if Mr. Porter has the raw numbers to give you, but when we assessed it to the requested budgets, and assuming that we could use some existing reserves to bump up general fund, which is one of our most heavily used fund sources, as we went through the slides earlier this evening, and bump that from 15% to 20%, and what does that leave? And unless I can be corrected, but my assumption as we built that is we're down to this 158,800 that would still be available without leaving the city in too much of a bind should an emergency come up. And it might exceed the 20% by a little bit, because we're, again, not to bag on the state of Kansas, but here we are in June, July, and August trying to predict what our needs are going to be for January through December of next year. And so we try to build that to the best of our ability. Some of the unknowns, as Mr. Porter mentioned, is we're going to have a huge utility user in Hills. But to provide water, we're going to have to buy a little bit of more water in our, through our contract with BPU to be able to provide it. So the costs will go up, and then reciprocally, the revenue side will go up. Utility funds, though, are different than the general fund. The utility funds can only be used for utility-related items, and those revenues are generated by our utility rates. And as we talked about, we're not proposing increasing water cost or sewer cost. And as long as, our sanitation contract doesn't change, we'll have to renegotiate at some point next year, or at least negotiate for an extension. Those are things we control in a different manner. Dan, did you want to go over the raw numbers on fund balance?
Sure. So increasing the city's fund balance goal for the general fund in particular by 5% in the general fund from 15% to 20% represents about a rough number of about 185,000 according to our projected total revenue for 2023. Were we to take that action, that would utilize about 31% of our fund balance that George mentioned that has grown in exceedance of the 15% minimum target. So that's a relatively moderate step forward, and it still gives us some flexibility and would allow us to exceed that 20%. That is based on several assumptions, though. One, the level of 2023 revenue, and also where we'll end this year. That's based on our best guess at this point.
Anything further on that?
Well, that number is really important. And I was pretty sure I asked for what it would be. How much is it? What's our projected budget surplus at the end of '23? How much is it and what percentage? And
okay.
what is that number?
Sure, so,
And if we're at 20% or 70% or 5,000%, it makes a difference.
yes.
It makes a difference in and these people are just here asking for it. What is it? What is our ending projected dollar amount in the general fund? If you don't want to give it to me, that's okay.
I have that number.
That's this council's decision.
So that number is projected to start 2023 at 1.15 million in the city general fund. And following adoption of the budget as published for tonight, that adjustment, depending on the decision made on the 159,000 or 158,800, would be a flat change, so no change. 1.151 would be the starting and the ending fund balance with a balanced budget for next year. If a decision's made to reduce property tax or any other revenue assumption or to add expenditures in any way, that would obviously modify that amount. As a percentage of 2023 revenue, should property tax be levied again as published, that would be 28% of revenue, which is, again, an exceedance of the 15% minimum target. Does that answer your question, Mr. Donnelly?
Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Yes.
Anyone else? If not, I would accept a motion for Resolution 09-2201.
We're there yet? We're there? Or do we need to figure out the 158.8 first? Or is that a separate motion? That's the actual
Yeah,
budget?
That'd be
Okay.
a
That's a separate.
Thank
So the resolution, I would make a motion that we approve Resolution 09-22-01, a resolution of the city of Tonganoxie, Kansas to levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral rate.
Thank you. Mr. Dale, is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
Mayor Freeze, that item does need a roll call vote by state statute.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify.
Ms. Huntington?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Okay, point of procedure. What goes next then?
So now, as Mr. Dale indicated, we're ready for consideration of the 2023 proposed budget. So what was published was utilization of the full 2.567 mils in the general fund. And again, that is open to discussion and change and suggestion and eventual change by the governing body based on your policy preferences.
Okay.
So that is kind of our last remaining item to determine proposed budget for your considered adoption.
Okay, thank you. What are the concerns or questions or conversation about the budget at this point?
Do we need to have one final budget workshop on the 19th of September? Didn't you say that would fall within our timeline to publish a final budget?
We could, unless, if there's, through whatever discussion there might be tonight on these remaining values, and we can't get to some consensus, we can certainly push, I think, just continue this discussion to the next meeting. But I would ask, if we're gonna do that, did we, because this is a culmination of, again, months' worth of
I agree.
discussions.
I agree.
Did we identify the four things? And again, I'll mention, I approved to move the 2.567 mils to general fund for publication because it gives you, as an elected body, the most discretion and flexibility in what you do with this money, as opposed to leaving it in one of those other funds where we wouldn't be able to have these types of conversations. And so that's why we did publish it that way, but we can make adjustments from it because we know we have an amount not to exceed.
Okay.
So are we as a governing body that far off on the budget among the five of us?
Probably.
Probably.
Well, no, I'll only speak for me. In my opinion, we ought to get as close to the 20%. Agreed, I would agree that we need to raise that level. Things are more expensive. There's risk in the environment. We can mitigate a lot of the risk by the things that are going over time. We're adding 3 new commercial buildings. We probably added, I don't know how much in valuation in houses. So our valuation with no new increase in value is going up by a lot. So our income over the long run, will continue to go up just because we have more assets coming into town. Houses, commercial buildings, that stuff adds revenue to the city coffers. So we use a reserve for rainy day fund in the future. If something blows up or something tanks, who knows what's gonna happen? We don't know. So we were at 15% for a long time, and we haven't raised it yet, and policy is just policy. If we raise it to 20% and then move closer to that 20%, we can still fund the top one. I'm comfortable with that, but we can make these numbers get closer to reality. Well, reality is in the eyes of the beholder. So, or we can keep it all. It doesn't, then why have a 20% policy? Let's have a 50% policy or a 300% policy. It doesn't matter. What do we want to do?
So then is the budget time the time to visit the policy? Almost seems like that's a whole nother discussion in some regards.
Well, we do visit it every budget when we end up
Correct.
with the final, the estimated final remaining balance. That's after what we project the revenue, what we project the expenses, knowing that something's not gonna work right. We know that. We know it every year. And we project at the end, but some things may be better. Some things may be worse. And we could have a catastrophe, but I don't believe we are in the business of insuring for catastrophe. We have insurance for some things, but there's other things that you just can't. We may have 3,000 inches of snow, and we have a gazillion-dollar salt bill. I don't know that. You can't predict every possible negative outcome, nor can you predict the positive outcomes. We can see the positive outcomes with 3 new commercial buildings going that are not on the tax rolls. We can see building permits of how many this year? 50?
More than 40, yep.
Probably north of $350,000 a house, probably north of $400,000. That's all. We have not seen that income yet. We won't see it until 2024.
Right.
All right, so those are little gifts that we are given because we're a community that's growing. If we were in a negative population decline and our values were going down, that's a different story. Our values are going up. These people are here because mostly their taxes went up, but it wasn't because of us, because their values went up. They don't know that. And it's hard on them. It's terrible hard on them. And it's hard on all of us. So to get to this, how much do we need to keep in a pile and just keep it? I don't know what that answer is, but that's what the purpose of a policy is. So if we set a policy, let's set it. If it's 50%, okay, let's do it. Then the public knows what it is.
I agree with you. I'm sorry to step on you, Ms. Stevens.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I completely understand policy. It's what I didn't study for many years. I know that there are other people here waiting to do other things on our agenda, and we could probably have, I'm just cognizant of other people's time, and we could all kind of just chat about this for a while, probably, and save them just having to sit through this. Because I mean, if I just made a motion to adopt the budget right now, there would still be some questions. I mean, we have to hash through those 4 bullet points.
I think.
correct?
Chris, to your point, I understand and appreciate and respect that perspective. My perspective on the budget, the budget summary, or I guess the excess fund balances is, when I set my budget at home, I set it based on what I can reasonably expect my income is going to be, right? And then throughout the year, I might have a little bit of a windfall, and that goes, that goes to my funds surplus, right? And for the next year, in case I don't have the revenue or the income that I'm expecting. If I set a goal by policy of 15%, by exceeding it, that means I've met my goal, but it doesn't mean I'm just gonna turn the money away and not try to use it or not try to keep it aside for the next year when I don't meet my goal. So if we set our goal at 20% by policy and, 2 years down the road, we don't meet that, then we've got another issue. I think every year is different. So you mentioned the assets that we're bringing in and the additional tax base that's coming in. Again, being 2024 before any of that's realized, we're working on 2023, and 2024 can be addressed when those things are coming in line and when they're starting to pay. But in the meantime, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think for me, it's looking at the budget and finding ways to lower the mill levy as we can, but still maintain not just that minimum fund balance requirement of 15%, but being cautious of what it's going to take to keep things going smoothly. I think we've been very lucky through COVID, through 2020 and into 2021, that we didn't have the deterioration that a lot of other communities had. And so, I'd like to keep that going as long as we can. Moving on from there, I'm also in support of the cost of living adjustment. So I personally, I would like to see that continued in there. Cost of living is rising for everybody, and I think our staff does a tremendous job. Certainly want to make sure that we keep as many of them as we can and not lose them to other communities or to other careers.
I agree with the cost of living. They do a lot with smaller staffs. So maybe I would like to make a motion to consider the adoption of the 2023 budgets, including bullet point 1, the city manager's recommendation for considering a 3% cost of living adjustment for the full-time classified employees, and bullet point 3, increase funding for other community projects or initiatives, including crosswalks dedicated to the memory of Rocky Hempel to make them safer, and other community projects to be determined.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. It's been moved and seconded. We'll take a roll call on this, Ms. Huntington.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to item E, ordinance number 1506, the CUP amendment for Timber Lake subdivision. Mr. Rakovich.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. So ordinance number 1506, the CUP stands for Community Unit Plan. This is related to the zoning that we did for Timber Lakes. The previous developer had done a preliminary plat for multiple phases of that development. This project takes the remaining 8 acres that are still within the city limits. The item had gone to Planning Commission on August 4th. The CUP, though, kind of, like I mentioned, it functions almost as a zoning. So the change wasn't that they're not going to build residential single-family homes. I think the change primarily was that on the original preliminary plat that was filed, I think in the early 2000s, it showed 25 homes and roads continuing up the hill or into the county. And the new plat that was submitted, preliminary plat, showed a looped road, a closed road that just keeps all the development in the city limits, and I think it has 27 lots. There is a protest period that's allowed, and so we weren't able, there wasn't enough time between the August Planning Commission and the second August meeting to let that period expire. And that's why we're coming before you tonight. We did not receive a protest petition. There was really good discussion, I think, at the Planning Commission meeting, again, between the developer and existing neighbors, that both in the chambers here and continued outside afterwards. And the project still has a way to go. It still needs a final plat. The engineering reports, we continue to have dialogue on issues that we review any project that's submitted, but in highlighting it even more, hearing some of the neighborhood concerns about things like stormwater and just general construction questions, water pressure. That's why I referenced the booster station when we were talking about CMIP earlier. So I know that Les Hamilton, he's with BHC. They're the engineers that have been hired by the developer to finish this phase or complete this part and advance a final plat. He's here should you have any other questions, but staff is recommending or asking for approval on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Brockovich. Is there anyone here who would care to speak to this issue? I'm not seeing anyone. Council, do you have any questions or concerns or conversation? Sure, come on up. We allow a 3-minute limit for, okay.
James
would-
Crowley, 133 Hatchell Road. I was here for the planning commission meeting, and once the conversation took place at the end of the meeting about the booster station on Smiley, there was a lot of resolve to that communication, so appreciate that information and appreciate you guys for what you do. I'd just like to state that if everything goes through with that, I think as long as the water pressure is in place, I've talked to a lot of the community, probably very happy people, so thank you.
Thank you for saying so. Council, do you have anything further? If not, I would entertain a motion.
That was 1506.
Yes.
I would make a motion that we approve ordinance 1506, amending the community unit plan for approximately 8.1 acres, of real property in the subdivision commonly known as Timber Hills Farm, amending ordinance number 1200 and resolution number 10-05-01.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Item F is to consider approval of a temporary cereal malt beverage license for the Abdallah Shrine Demolition Derby. Mr. Porter?
Thank you, Mayor. This item is for your consideration for an event actually scheduled later this week, so they barely got it in time for us to complete your consideration and the filing of the application with the state. This event is scheduled at the Leavenworth County Fairgrounds from September 9th to the 10th and allows sales and related activities to prepare and clean up from sales from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. at the event site to occur. The city does require a fee of $150 for this type of application, and that fee has been paid in full. This item is an event that we have been fortunate to have scheduled for several years, and when we have circulated this with our staff from police, fire, and public works, none have indicated any concerns to be issued with this year's consideration of renewing their approval for the sales. Happy to answer any questions you might have in addition.
Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Porter? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the temporary CMB license for Abdullah Shrine Bull Bash and Demolition Derby at the Leavenworth County Fairgrounds.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item G is review and consider applications for city council position vacancy. It's my understanding, Mr. Brakovich, we have one application, correct?
Yes. And he is here this evening. So again, we had set a couple of dates out. Late August was kind of the first review or in time for that last meeting that we had. And the deadline for submittals extended beyond that. And the discussion amongst the city council was to go ahead and let that ride through and come to this meeting tonight for two reasons. One, to ensure that the applicant is still interested, and I appreciate him coming and hearing part of the budget discussion tonight, so we'll see where he's at. And then the second was to allow to see if there would be any more applicants, and as you stated, Mayor, we've not received any more. And so I think what we've done in the past is, even though we've already had a Q&A session, you've invited applicants back up as kind of the final series of questions, and if there's anything we didn't talk about the last time. And then if there's a motion to approve, we can accommodate that and swear in tonight as well.
Mr. Donnelly, I think, did you miss? You may have been absent at that meeting. Do you have questions for Mr. Partridge?
Well, I hate being tardy and not being able to ask. I feel like, no, just, would you mind just a couple?
No, not at all.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you. I'd be anxious to hear your thoughts on what you think the good things of Tonganoxie are and the things that we need to work on.
Well, the good things about Tonganoxie, I think it's a community that's represented by a large swath of all kinds of people in Kansas. I think you have influences from, it's a bit of an excerpt. You have influences from the city of Kansas City. You have influence from the city of Lawrence, but you also have a strong rural tradition and agricultural tradition here. So I think it's a city that's growing, as evidenced by a lot of discussion tonight. It's going to have unique challenges that relate to that. But I think it's a place that's, as long as I can remember, has kind of stood for the first thing that came to my mind is good schools. When I was a kid, we even in Hutchinson, Kansas, we knew of Tonganoxie for its legendary debate teams. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we chose to come here is for the schools and live here, my wife and my 3 daughters and I. I think we have a unique small town environment. We have a nice downtown, and I think we have a community that I just love my neighborhood, my community where I live. So,
What are our challenges,
well, I think
other than me?
no, I think the challenges are going to be balancing what I see. This is just my amateur opinion, but I see it. We have a lot of growth. I think on the northeast side of town, for example, right? We have a lot of how do we continue to foster a unified community between residents in the more central part of the town versus people who are more in the subdivisions. The continued growth, I'm sure, that are going to be in those areas. And then, like property tax on everybody's mind because what happened tonight, of course, I understand that. And I think that will always be a challenge to determine how we're going to allocate our resources in a way that both provides the best services that people deserve and expect, and also keeps people who have been here for a long time able to continue to live here. And You know, I know it's just one part of the property tax dollar, you know, as evidenced by that slide tonight, but, you know, property taxes are also have an impact on who wants to move here and all that kind of stuff. So very important decisions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you
Yeah.
indulging me very much.
Council, do you have any further questions? Thanks again. Appreciate it. So we don't have any other deadlines that we said that we would wait for applications, that we've gone the distance.
We've met all of our previously published deadlines. So our real backstop on this, though, is the timeframes that are set forth within our own city code. And what we're trying to do is make an appointment prior to, I believe it's September 16th, and if we couldn't do that, then it would be a required special election. And we did reach out to the county clerk to get a cost estimate on that, in case we didn't have any qualified applicants. And Mr. Porter, I don't know if you remember that off the top of your head. I want to say it was 14,000, 20,000. It was a fairly substantial cost to run a special election. And we were hopeful that we'd get qualified, at least one qualified candidate, so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brakovich. At this point, I would entertain a motion.
I think that, I think we are fortunate to have at least one qualified candidate, and I'll make a motion that we appoint Matt Partridge to the vacant city council position.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you for applying.
Yeah, thank you. We'll find a seat for you next week, or 2 weeks.
Do you want to?
I mean, we could swear in tonight, unless, you know, if he wants to bring family and friends next time to take pictures and document the moment. We'll leave it up to Mr. Partridge. Oh, that's right. Good point. So the next meeting won't be in advance of our deadline. So unless Anna wants to clarify, by taking action tonight and approving it, do we fulfill the legal requirement, or do we need to swear
I think it's
Matt in
appropriate
tonight?
to swear in.
Okay.
You can Photoshop
You can
family
run
into
now.
the picture.
You run, you can
This
get
is your
away.
last chance.
Tear one of these up and make some confetti.
Yeah.
I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and faithfully discharge
and faithfully discharge
the duties of City Council Member,
the duties of City Council Member.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. and Council.
All right, cool. City manager agenda,
No additional items, Mayor. Thank you.
city attorney agenda,
No items, Mayor?
mayor pro tem agenda,
No items?
city council agenda. Mayor agenda, I have nothing, and I will cede the rest of my time to Mr. Dale.
Well, with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.